Test, test, test. 1, 2, 3. Okay. Sorry about that, especially if you're at home. But we're talking about these love builders and changing our behavior. And the whole reason why we are motivated to work, and sometimes it takes a lot of work. You hear people talk about, well, marriage is great, but it takes a lot of work. All these relationships takes work, and changing our baggage we bring to them, our bad behavior, our bad habits is difficult. But the whole motivation is Jesus Christ. He went to the cross not for himself, but for us. Because he wanted a relationship with us. He went to the cross not when we were deserving and when we were righteous and we were holy people, but as Paul says in Romans chapter 5, he went there on that cross when we were unrighteous, ungodly, and enemies. And so we want to talk this morning about our third love builder and unfortunately our third love buster. And this is what we call respect. We need to have respect in our relationship for our partners, for our friends, for our spouse, for our parents, for our children, for our brethren. And so we're going to talk about respect, respectful persuasion, respectful persuader this morning. And as we often do, there's one particular verse we want to focus on as we talk about this particular love builder versus love buster. And the one we're going to use for this one is in Genesis chapter 2 and in verse 24. Genesis 2, verse 24. Now, I know that this is in the context of marriage, that this is the passage that establishes marriage, but by principle, it does extend to all relationships. And so in Genesis chapter 2, verse 24, as man looks at this woman that God has created for him, this companion, this helpmate, he's excited, he's emotional. He basically says to God, you absolutely got it right. And seeing that love at first sight, God then establishes marriage that lasts a lifetime in one sentence. For this cause a man shall leave his father and his mother and shall cleave to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. It's the oneness of that we're talking about. A lot of relationships do not work out because it is difficult for two to become one. And especially in marriage, if you don't understand the secret of how two become one flesh, that marriage, that relationship will not work out. And in all of our relationship, there is a unifying principle. There is unity. There is a oneness in all of that. And so, in order to make our relationships built on love and to deposit that love into that love bank of that relationship, it takes work. And sometimes bad habits have to simply be deliberately thought of, recognized, and stopped. And that's what we're going to talk about this morning. So last time we were talking about this taker versus this giver. We all have this. Paul in the book of Romans talked about it more in these terms, that we set our mind on the flesh or we set our mind on the spirit. Well, let's think about it in either of these terms. What is this taker? Well, the taker is this part of us that says, listen, you're unhappy. I'm going to take over and I'm going to fix this unhappy situation and make you happy. But the problem with that is that the taker wants to make us happy, the self happy, even if it makes others unhappy, miserable, feeling unloved. That's what the mindset on the flesh does. What is the mindset on the flesh? It is a mind that, in essence, enters into sin willfully and frequently. And what is sin? When you really boil it down, it's selfishness. It's I want to do what I want to do, I want to feel what I want to feel, and I don't care how it impacts others, even God. Whereas the giver in us, setting our mind on the Spirit, as God's Word talks about thinking about others and caring for others, and not just self, the giver wants to make others happy, even if that means sometimes you're unhappy. You don't get your way. You do it for other people. And the key to this is, even if it's not what makes you happy, not what you would want, there is an element where you become happy, because there is this it's better to give than to receive. To make others happy has its own fulfillment, its own return. And so in lesson number 1, we talked about the love builder of honesty. And we talked about having some intimate relationships by being brutally honest, open. And when we're able to do that, it will make us even closer. It's going to build that trust. It's going to build that intimacy. Your strongest relationships that you have are those relationships that you are the most honest with that person or those people. But when you are brutally honest, when you're able to open yourself up and be truthful about yourself, that makes you vulnerable. And for a lot of people, they don't like to be vulnerable. And so it's hard to be honest and open. But I want to just ask you to be honest with yourself, in your marriage, in your family life, with your brethren, at work, and in all your relationships, your friendships. Are you a person that can be honest? If not, that has to change. Dishonesty is a love buster. We talked about number 2, about the love buster of selfishness and selfish demands versus caring about your partner and what they desire and what they want. Seeking a mutual agreement, a win-win situation in that relationship. And what we're going to talk about this morning is very, very similar to what we talked about last time, and how do we solve this love buster versus love builder. And I want to introduce us to what we want to talk about this morning by talking about a couple. Yes, we're talking again, most of this in the sense of marriage, but by principle, this works in all relationships. I want to talk to you about Tom and Linda. All right? Let's start with Linda. Linda grew up in what we might call a blue-collar home. Neither of her parents graduated from high school, and so they found jobs that didn't pay too much, but tried to survive on it. Education was not a big thing in Linda's house, and so she lived in a very poor, or had a very poor childhood financially. There was not much there. On top of that, she had 4 other siblings, 5 children altogether, in a low-income house, and you can kind of feel for Linda a little bit. She had no independence. She had no money of her own. And that was Linda. And when she turned 18, she was able to get a job as a receptionist. Didn't pay much, but it paid enough for her to move out, get her own apartment, a small little apartment, buy an old used car that worked, at least for now, and give her some independence. It wasn't much, but Linda thought it was wonderful. Well, at work, there was a young executive named Tom. He was completely the opposite of Linda. He was well educated, come from a very, very high-class, wealthy family. In fact, Tom had 2 college degrees. Very smart, a lot of potential. And he was very attracted to Linda. Eventually, the passing of her desk that started off as just a good day, hello, how are you, turned into lunch dates. Eventually, Tom and Linda fell in love, and as we often do, when you're dating, you put your best foot forward. Eventually, Tom and Linda got married. And as they got married, Tom then felt a little more comfortable to let his true self come out. Linda had seen signs of this, but she felt, well, Tom is very educated. Maybe he's right. So what started happening is Tom would come to Linda at work and he would help her correct all of her mistakes. He would be critical of everything that she'd do. He'd keep telling her she's doing it wrong. She needs to do it this way. Nothing Linda could do was ever right. So Linda told Tom that, well, he makes enough money for both of them. She wanted to stay home and become a housewife. But in reality, what Linda wanted to do was get out of Tom's negative, critical lifestyle at work. Linda thought that that would be staying home, taking care of the kids. But what happened is Tom just transferred that to home, and now everything at home was wrong. The way she cleaned the house, the way she cooked. He was very disrespectful in his judgments to her. And that's what we want to talk about as a third love buster. Disrespectful judgments. Being highly critical. Criticizing the ones that we love. And the thing about this is that we can define it this way. Being highly critical, disrespectful in our judgments is when we try to impose, or better yet, maybe the better word is we try to force our way of thinking or our way of doing things on others. The problem with this type of behavior is that, like all of these that we're talking about, it is very, very deceptive. It doesn't come from the giver, but from the taker. But that's the deceptive part. We tell ourselves that we're helping this person, that we're doing it out of love and compassion. But if we really are honest with ourselves, and there's that honesty again, we are simply trying to get what we want. They're not doing things the way we would do them. And so the taker says, step aside, I will take over, I'll get it done. And then that taker tells you, look, you did a good thing, you helped this person. I don't care for your opinion. I don't know why you think that way. The taker says, step aside, I'll take care of this. It's very, very destructive, and oftentimes people don't see it. And I want to be honest with you, because I want you to be honest with yourselves. I talked about Tom and Linda. You could take out the word Tom, and you could write in there the name Brent. For years, I was like that. I'm still that way sometimes. I'm a work in progress. But that's the way I was. I thought my way was always the best way. I was highly critical of others, especially my wife. And I had to change that. And I'm still working on it. I hope you'll be honest with yourself. If this is a love buster that's taking love out of your relationship, figure it out now. Don't think it's going to get better on its own. Disrespectful judgments. being critical of others. It really comes from a desire to control others. We think that we're helping them, but here's the problem. We're ignoring their emotional response. The fact that they are depressed, the fact that they feel unloved, the fact that they feel so disrespected, we don't care about that. That's the taker in us. We ignore their emotional reaction to our helping them. We think this is the way to fix the situation. But I hope that you can see this morning it's not the right way. It's not going to fix anything. It's going to create other problems. It's going to destroy relationships. And one of the characteristics of this is that this type of disrespect and judgmentalism often turns into fun and games. In other words, the critic is entertained by the foolishness of his or her partner. In the case of Tom and Linda, he often makes fun of Linda's family because of their foolishness, because they were not well educated, the way that they looked at things or did things. Imagine your spouse making fun of your family and laughing at them. That's what I did. And I have to change. Making fun of your partner because they think differently or do things differently. Tom thought it was a big joke. The problem is Linda wasn't laughing. So we talked about in that first lesson about honesty. And the thing about honesty is when you're in that intimate relationship, honesty, being brutally honest, you're opening yourself up. That type of honesty has to be done with someone that can hold that in secure ways, that can be responsible for that. And this type of partner that is so disrespectful and critical is often the type of person that won't hold that honesty with responsibility, but will probably even make fun of what you have confessed or opened up to this person. You see, these love busters, these love builders, they're all connected. Let's look at a passage in just a second. I forgot about this page. So what I want to get across to you is this kind of pattern. This kind of controlling, critical person. It often starts with this. Well, there's a difference of opinion. Or there's a difference that you notice of the way you would do it versus the way your partner is doing it. The taker says, let me take over. And what happens, and what we talked about last time, you make these demands. Right? Because it works. You scare your partner into doing it. You demand it. These selfish demands. But after a while, that may not work. And when that doesn't work, when it seems to be failing, then what happens is this controlling person turns into what we're talking about now, these disrespectful judgments, criticizing them. Oh, you want to hold to that opinion? Well, you're just so silly and foolish. And those are kind of calm words, aren't they, for what most people say. And then what happens? Well, these all lead to fights and love withdrawals. And even if you make up, if the behavior isn't changed, if the pattern isn't changed, it's just going to keep going. And as we talked about in a previous series on marriage, we get into what's called the crazy cycle. We get in the demolition derby where we're just trying to hit one another, back up, hit one another. And this behavior may not be easy to change. It may be something that first you have to recognize. Uh-oh, here I go again. And stop it. and take deliberate steps to build love, to change the bad habits. Bad habits take a while to change. They don't change overnight. They don't just change on their own. It takes a deliberate notice and effort to make those changes. So watch out for this crazy cycle. Watch out for this pattern. Be willing to be honest with yourself. Be willing to be honest with your partner. Now, what we're doing here is putting into practical terms passages in the Bible. For example, one of the great passages that just talks about this very thing is Philippians 2:2-4. Let's take a look at that, where Paul writes, look at this, "Make my joy complete by being of the same mind, maintaining the same love, united in spirit, intent on one purpose. Do nothing from selfishness or empty conceit, but with humility of mind, let each of you regard one another as more important than himself. Do not merely look out for your own personal interests, but also for the interest of others." All we're trying to do is come up with a practical, daily, behavioral way of putting Philippians 2 into action in all your relationships. Yeah, absolutely. He's talking about brotherly relationships here, but if I have to be that way to my brother in Christ, I got to be that way to my child, to my spouse, to my coworkers. Why? Because this is what builds up strong, supportive relationships, families. You know, there's a reason why so often at work, They try to boost morale. They try to increase productivity. Why? By saying, hey, we're all family here. We're all family here at this place of business. So instead of disrespectful judgments, what's the solution? Well, let's try respect. Respectful persuasion. Similar to our last resolution of mutual agreement, the cool thing about this is that if there is a difference of opinion, right? We're not always going to agree with our partner, with our spouse, with our parents, our children, our brethren, right? But if there is a difference of opinion, what? Well, you can have discussions. You can actually try to persuade them over to your side. But it has to be done, number one, with respect. We're talking about people that we've entered into relationships with because we love them, we care for them. You need to respect your partner's opinions and desires, even if they're different from your own. If your partner does not agree with you, you can try to persuade them. They can try to persuade you to your side, but only with love, gentleness, kindness, respect. One of the things that we as Christians need to be careful of is what the world, what our society is set up, is that in certain contexts, it's okay to ridicule others because you have a difference of opinion. We had an election year. And on both sides, that's what gets so dirty. Christians need to be very careful about politics. Just because the world says it's a context where you can ridicule the other side and make fun of them and have no love for them and no respect for them, I'm not sure that's the way God sees it. And I don't think that's the way we persuade the other side to our way of thinking. Well, that's okay because that's politics. That's different. Well, I'm not sure if I see a passage in the Bible that says that. But in any relationship, we need to be careful because we need to respect our partner's opinions and desires. And so, some of the steps that need to be deliberately taken if this is a problem for us. If we're going to have these discussions and try to persuade the other to our side, well, number one, those discussions of persuasion, they need to be safe and they need to be enjoyable discussions. They need to be with all, that kindness, that love, that gentleness. If at some point you feel yourself getting angry and upset and, why can't you see what I'm talking to you about? Why can't you see it? You're going to have to stop, cool down, and come back when it can be safe again. Number two, listen to each other's opinions with respect and love. A lot of times, differences may be perceived differences. Maybe we think we know what they're saying. A lot of times people just cut off someone and go, I know what you believe already. But when we listen to them, when we really open our ears to listen, we may not have understood at all what they think, believe, or desire. The Bible says that we are to treat others as we want to be treated. Do you want people to just assume they know what you're thinking of? That's one of the biggest signs of disrespect. People telling you what you believe before you have an opportunity to actually tell them. And these are people we love. Number three, brainstorm possible solutions. Can you come to agreement? Well, a lot of times it's just, what's our possibilities here? That's the thing. A lot of people bang their head against the wall in relationships and get upset and they get angry because they want the solution to be something that's not possible. You ever had that discussion? I ran a medical call one time with a gentleman, and he had two options. He said, I'm fine. But all of his vitals and all of the history did not show him to be fine. And so we gave him these choices. Here's your possibilities. You stand up and you show us you can walk on your own and not fall down and you're in good health, or you're going to the hospital. He wanted the third option, not to do any of those, and for us just to leave him alone. Well, legally, we couldn't do that. And so finally we had to convince them that if you can't stand up and show us you can walk on your own in good health without falling, we've got to take you to the hospital. A lot of people don't want the possible solutions. They keep fighting and fighting for that which is impossible. So brainstorm, and maybe at that point you can get to step number 4, and that is where you find a win-win agreement. Maybe you persuade them to your side. Maybe it's something like this. Okay, let's try it your way, but if it doesn't work for me, we're going to try it my way. And maybe that's the agreement. Or maybe there's just no agreement, and maybe it's time to drop it. Maybe it's like that saying, we're just going to have to agree to disagree. And sometimes it happens in relationships. So, what have we done here today? Well, number one, I hope that we've been real honest with each other. And that we've given a very practical way of a problem that destroys relationships. And a very practical way of how to fix that. What we've done here is looked at passages like the ones we're going to look at now. 1 Peter 3, verse 8 and 9. As we bring our lesson to a close, let's look at some passages that really reflect the very things we've been talking about. And I hope that you'll see it very, very clearly. 1 Peter 3, verse 8 and 9. To sum up, let all be harmonious, sympathetic, brotherly, kind-hearted, and humble in spirit, not returning evil for evil, or insult for insult, but giving a blessing instead. For you were called for the very purpose that you might inherit a blessing. That's exactly what we talked about this morning. In practical terms, how can we put this into our relationships? Let's take a look at this passage in James chapter 2 and verse 13. For judgment will be merciless to the one who has shown no mercy. Mercy triumphs over judgment. We described a person exactly what James was talking about, or a person who's what? Disrespectful, judgmental, critical. One who judges without any type of mercy. But what I want to get across, I'm not making this stuff up. This is right out of the Bible. Let's take a look at this passage, Matthew 7, verse 2. For in the way you judge, you will be judged. And by your standard of measure, it will be measured to you. How many of us want God to judge us, not just in a critical way, but in a way that we deserve? No, I thank God for His grace and His mercy. And even though I'm a sinner that is constantly a work in progress, He's made it possible by what? By the crescendo of John, by the death and burial of Jesus Christ, that I can stand blameless before my God, before my judge. I don't want Him to judge me the way I sometimes judge people, the way I used to judge people I loved. And I hope you're the same way. Jesus Christ and what He's done for us is the entire motivation of why I want, if I'm involved in love busting, I want to do everything I can to become a love builder. Thank you so much.